Ladies and gentlemen, welcome to the Foreign Correspondents Club of Japan. My name is Martin Kölling and I'm the moderator of today. I'm with the German financial daily Handelsblatt. And it is my pleasure to welcome today's guests. But before I do that, I would like to mention a few housekeeping rules. Please switch your mobile phones to silent mode or off together out of courtesy to our guests. Okay, 1 year ago, Russia began missile and artillery strikes against Ukraine. Today's guest, the Ambassador Sergey Korsunsky, immediately explained the situation here at the FCCJ. Today, he will brief us about the situation 1 year later. At his side are the US Ambassador to Japan, Rahm Emanuel, and the Chargé d'affaires at the European Union, Haitze Siemers. I expect a quite sober event. The war is still raging, with maybe 500,000 deaths on both sides already, and there is no end in sight of the bloodshed. Rather, the world faces a risk of further escalation. Russia is strengthening its attacks, mobilizes more and more soldiers for its war of aggression. Western allies support the Ukraine with more sophisticated weapons, and at the same time, China raises its stakes in the conflict. Today, maybe, who knows, the Chinese President Xi Jinping might present his so-called peace plan, but what about possible weapons exports? We don't know. Those would, of course, raise the specter of US sanctions against China, an unwelcome scenario for many European and Asian countries. I think my home country, Germany, and Japan included. Now let's listen to what our guests have to say for the prospects of war and peace in Eastern Europe and beyond. First, the Ukrainian Ambassador Korsunsky will give his speech. It's around 30 minutes, and then the US Ambassador and the Chargé d'affaires of the European Union will also give short speeches. And after that, I will open the floor to questions. Please give our guests a very warm welcome.
Thank you very much. Dear fellow ambassadors, dear members of the Media Corp, I will try to be very concise, but I prepared my presentation to show you some pictures to remind the story of this 1 year of 3-day war which happening today. So please, I would like to first to remind you what was happening before the war. Before the war, you remember there were first, it was 2 ultimatums presented by Russia to the West, to the NATO, to United States, demanding absolute nonsense to withdraw troops from Europe, to return to borders of NATO 1997, etc. But then everyone was very carefully watching Russian troops which were amassed along the Ukrainian borders. All ambassadors, you see Galuzin, you see ambassador of Russia to EU, to Britain, deputy foreign minister, they all were lying. They all were lying, saying we have absolutely no intention to attack Ukraine. The only powerful force who was telling the truth, that was United States of America, President Biden, who was warning by himself through different sources that attack is imminent, it may happen. Even we were not completely sure that that could happen. I have to recognize that because it was absolutely impossible to imagine that in 21st century you can hope to attack a country of 40 million people and take over it, and so on and so forth. So that was what was before 24th. Next slide. On 24th, we have this, sorry, not gentleman, President Putin, who said that special operation is going to begin. That was 5 a.m. in the morning, and we were seeing missiles flying over Ukraine, airplanes, massive forces on the ground, hundreds, if not thousands, of tanks. So that was massive, full military attack. I don't know why he was calling it a special military operation, because you should call a spade a spade. That was beginning of the real war. Next, on 25th of February, in this here in this room, there were 3 press conferences. First it was mine press conference, then it was Ambassador Galuzin, then it was Ambassador Emanuel. And as maybe many of you been here and you remember, he was lying again and again. We were telling the truth. We're still here. He was promoted. So today we have EU with us, which is, from my perspective, is much more advantages. So we will tell you the truth again, please. That's 10th of March. So at that time, Russian military forces were very close to Kyiv, really close. They stopped like maybe 10 kilometers from the house where I live now, and they stopped maybe 1 kilometer from the house where my parents live. So that was a real threat to Ukraine. And still, Lavrov was saying, meeting Kuleba in Turkey, we did not attack Ukraine. What you call an attack? I mean, like 72 kilometers long tank column entering suburbs of Kyiv. No, I mean, this is not an attack. I specifically put this to remind you that when we talk now about desire Ukraine to find a peace solution, we tried. We tried in Turkey. We tried 3 times meeting in Belarus. As you remember, probably all those attempts were blocked by Russians, because the only peace they understand, complete surrender of Ukraine. We should stop fighting. They will take over. They will change President Zelensky for somebody pro-Russian, and again, no NATO, no EU. Ukraine is back to the Soviet Union. So that's the only peace solution. After that, after we saw what they did in Bucha, in Irpin, in Borodyanka, that's small cities around Kyiv, we cannot negotiate with them anymore. Next slide. So the best analysis, what may happen before the war, was presented by CSIS, the most trustable, from my personal perspective, think tank in the United States. 3 scenarios. First phase of the war, that's attack from north and east and south to take over Ukraine on the left bank of the Dnipro River. Then it will be substituted for attack from the south to take our southern ports, Odessa, Mykolaiv, out of business, and to take as far as Moldova. And the third wave, that would be another offense to take the whole territory of Ukraine up to the borders with NATO territory, EU, with Poland, Slovak Republic, Hungary, etc. So those scenarios were presented in a very comprehensive research. Please. And guess what? 2 of them did happen. So the first wave of attack was predicted, and you see the map of offense of Russians, and they were really quickly moving towards Kyiv, and they were very close to Kharkiv. This is major industrial cities, and they took over Chernobyl nuclear power plant. And again, I warned here in this room before war that nuclear terrorism, that's one of the tools which Russia will use, and that was a beginning in the Chernobyl nuclear power plant. They took over several important cities in the south, and the Battle of Mariupol just began. Next one. The second scenario happened too. They were moving from Melitopol to Zaporizhia. They took over Zaporizhia nuclear power plant, the biggest in Europe. They tried to move further to Odessa, because if you block Odessa, we are completely cut from the Black Sea. We cannot trade. We cannot supply goods to Ukraine and from Ukraine. But they were stopping Mykolaiv. Mykolaiv, where I visited in December, a very heavily damaged, almost half destroyed city. But they stand, and they will never be in Mykolaiv again, but that was the idea, that they will take over Mykolaiv, Odessa, and move to Moldova. Next slide. The third scenario didn't happen, and they didn't happen. Why? Because of Ukrainian army was very well motivated to fight, and because we have had at that time after a couple of months of resistance, we already have seen the very powerful international coalition been formed under leadership of the United States, and this Rammstein formula was already to begin to exist, and we were already receiving a supply of heavy ammunition to fight against their tanks and their infantry, and we did use those equipment, very good equipment, very effectively, so they were stopped. So this third scenario didn't happen. Just to remind you a couple of pictures of We Never Attack Ukraine. Some of those pictures I did myself when I visited Ukraine in December in Kiev and Mykolaiv. Particularly, it's absolutely so stressful when you see it on TV, when you see it in media, in newspapers. It is one thing, but when you watch it closely, when you talk to those people, when you see what they have done, it's a completely different story, trust me. And those people killed in Bucha and so on, and how they try to blame, again and again, blame Ukraine, and this is theater. We have now, if I'm not mistaken, 87,000 criminal cases recorded properly by international team of prosecutors from court system in France, in Czech Republic, in other countries. Coming to Ukraine, we are very open. We give them opportunity to talk to local residents, to get the witness reports, to document every crime which was committed on our land. And we're absolutely open to that. Why? Because we want those crimes to be prosecuted in a court. We want them to be properly recorded, and we have support of international community to create international tribunal. So just to remind you those pictures from Bucha, when you see We Never Attack Ukraine, the central street full of what was left from Russian column of tanks after Javelin were properly used, and people hiding under the broken bridge when Ukrainian army was trying to evacuate them from those regions, because from those cities it was not expected. The amount of brutality, it was absolutely astonishing. Please. This is very recent pictures from Dnipro. Then they attacked, and this picture when you see kitchen. When finally rescue people, they got into this kitchen, they found a mobile phone there, and on this mobile phone they saw recordings of the family, a family of young parents, father and mother, and two small children. They were celebrating birthday of a 5-year-old girl on this kitchen. All of them, father and two children, were killed in this attack, and the mother, in a very difficult shape, is in hospital. So that's how they fight Ukrainians now. They switch. They cannot fight against our military, so they began to fight against our civilians. So they purposefully attack infrastructure. They destroy energy, first of all, energy supply. They destroy water supply. They destroy hospitals, universities, schools. So everything which would allow people to return and to live normal lives. So this is really something, again, beyond any comprehension. So any explanation that Ukrainian army, so that they say, that's us, that we do this to ourselves, that our army is hiding in civilian areas and residential areas. This is, of course, another brutal lie. Nothing even close happening. But they still, as far as we can calculate this number, it's very difficult. It's 5,000 missiles of different kinds were used against Ukraine. So imagine the size of this attack. Next slide, please. Again, attacking Kiev on the central TV tower, in school and residential areas, buses. This is Caliber, what has left from Caliber missile, very recently shot down over Ukraine. So we have plenty of this in our hands, and we analyze all this equipment, of course. This is those data 18th of February. So now we can talk about 145,000 Russian troops killed, and you can see absolutely astonishing number of tanks, airplanes, armored vehicles destroyed. Actually, if you calculate that, not every army in the world they have this kind of combined. So that is really a huge, massive of Russian equipment. There are different estimates about that. British intelligence say we already destroyed half of their army. Other intelligence say even more. You know that they don't have, they have deficiency even in personnel, to say nothing about modern equipment. And what we see there, a myth of second army. As I joke, this is neither second, not an army. So by number maybe, but by quality of this equipment, this is not even close match to what we receive from our partners, first of all from the United States, but from Germany, France, Netherlands, from Baltic states, from so many countries. They're helping us, and from Denmark, and it's the very long list of those who supply us with very sophisticated equipment, and we use it in very proper manner. Next slide. That's the picture. I would never use it, but Prigozhin put this picture himself. That's Bakhmut and corpse of Russian, his Wagner troops lying there. So I believe that is very refreshing for them, for Russians who celebrated day before yesterday on Luzhniki with whoever, I'm not sure it was Putin or his double, but whoever it was. It would be nice to see them, what they may expect. The next, this is the figure, is Defense British intelligence, how many Russians we kill per day. So number is growing, and now we achieve 1,010, and it's endless. When we talk to our soldiers in Bakhmut specifically, because this is now like a focal point of the war in eastern part of Ukraine, our people, they say it's like zombie movie. So you have corpse, layer of corpse, one after another, and you have newcomers going on, and we kill them again and again, and this is really like surreal picture. They don't care about their corpse, they don't care about their people. The more killed, the better. This is tactics which they used during the Second World War, nothing new, but we are doing our job, and people are very much resolved in Ukraine about how we see this battle, and we are not going to give them victory under any circumstances. Yeah, you see, this is I like this estimate. They lose 2,000 troops for every 100 yards won. So those numbers, they're absolutely unacceptable for a modern war, which would be, I mean, normally you fight the war with equipment, not with people. You value lives, not when it comes to Russia. When it comes to Ukraine, two figures are important, that 8 million refugees from Ukraine, this is official data from United Nations High Commissioner for Refugees, that 8 million people left Ukraine because of this war, the biggest crisis of refugee crisis since the Second World War. I can add to that, we have 6 million inside Ukraine displaced people. So they had to move from eastern part of Ukraine to the more or less stable western part and central part. In cities like Lviv, population doubled. In other cities, it tripled. And it is, of course, very hard to accommodate, but we continue to do that. We are, that I can repeat 1,000 times at each occasion. We are so grateful for the nations around the globe, and specifically to Japan. Japan is not supplying weapons to us, but when it comes to humanitarian part of the assistance, it's absolutely stunning amount of support provided to Ukraine and to countries around Ukraine, to Poland, to Romania, to Moldova. This is very important because they accommodate millions of Ukrainians, and inside Ukraine is assistance extremely valuable. Go ahead. One of the most despicable crimes which we witness, that's they took our children. And again, to avoid any speculations, that's MFA of Russia. They recognize themselves 190,000 children they took from eastern Ukraine to Russia. So this is something, psychological. You have to investigate it with application of doctors, because they recognize their crimes publicly in front of the world. They say, yes, we have stolen 190,000 Ukrainian children to brainwash them and to prepare probably for future battle against Nazist Ukraine and this bloody West, which supports us. So, and this lady, she's herself, this is a so-called children, she's responsible for children policy or something. She has now a boy from Mariupol, and she thanked Putin for this opportunity. So that was very touchy show on TV of her discussion with Putin. When it comes to the current situation and discussions about the peace, you see first statements from Putin of different dates. And you can see that's really psychologically disturbed person, because he says that war in Ukraine is not over, but Russia wants to end war in Ukraine. Victory in Ukraine is inevitable, but Russia is ready to negotiate. So all his statements in the terms of 1 week. So what you really want? You want to negotiate? The victory is inevitable. What you gonna do? It's not for us. I mean, for us, there is no secret anymore. We know with whom we are doing. We know what is coming. We know that the final solution, that's eradicate Ukrainians. And as they say on TV, yesterday they threatened to use nuclear weapons to blow volcanoes along the Pacific coast of the United States. Before that, they say if Kyiv should be leveled to zero and then would be Russian flag, we will do that. We'll take Poland in 20 minutes. We'll come to France and never leave again. And of course, East Germany should be returned. All this nonsense you will see now on those shows. And on one hand, you would say this is propaganda machine. True, but you know better than me. In Russia, nothing will happen on TV without Kremlin permission. So when you read it and you see that the only solution is complete destruction of Ukraine, how you can talk about peace? What kind of peace? Today, we're all waiting for Chinese peace plan or whatever. What plan? With whom? Next slide. Dugin. He was silent for some time. Now he's back. Two choices: victory of Russia or demise of humankind. Are you happy with that? So are we happy with that? So when you read this, and this is the person who advised Putin. I mean, maybe not 100%, but definitely those people, they create atmosphere in Russia that the only solution, that's Russian victory. Doesn't matter the price, doesn't matter how many people around the world will be killed. And this 4 times hero of Russia, or 3 times Kadyrov, again, we have to take Kyiv, Kharkiv, etc. And that is the mood in Russia. So what kind of peace negotiations could be? We believe in a peace plan of President Zelensky, and we have United Nations resolution adopted very recent about peace, because we want peace. We fight for peace. We don't want war. This is 100% clear. But peace in this situation could be achieved only, from our perspective, through overwhelming victory on the military side. Go ahead. That is very funny thing I would like to show you again. This is very recent map published in Moscow, in Russia actually. And you see territory of Ukraine already cut. So that is done. All the regions they claim they accommodate, I mean, they are part of Ukraine. So Zaporizhia, Kherson, Donetsk, and Lugansk, they already incorporated in Russia. So that's mentality. So they have absolutely no doubt that those regions which were like taken into Russia through absolutely illegal so-called referendums, which, as you may guess, didn't happen. So that's the answer to those who. There are a lot of people in the world writing now nice articles in foreign policy, even saying, you know what, we have to find solution, we have to negotiate peace. That is their peace. Next slide. And this is mood in Ukraine. I think it's November, but now it's only higher. You see that 95% of Ukrainians we have to carry on fighting. 89%. If even we carry on fighting, if even they use nuclear weapons, and no territorial compromise with Russia. So that's mood in Ukraine. So imagine, after a year of war, after enormous suffering, so many people killed, so many infrastructure destroyed, people in Ukraine, they're absolutely 100% sure we have to continue to fight. You know why? Because we now finally we understood what is going on. We see this country is absolutely incredible empire desire to expand, to eradicate Ukraine. That something they have been doing for 300 years without any success. So now it's final solution for Russia to get Ukraine back. Right now we have a special call for volunteers with military experience to join, as we call it, offensive guard. So new brigades, 4 brigades, which will be fresh units, which will be used for offensive. We are waiting for good weather to move forward, to liberate, to broke this eastern south part occupied by Russia, to broke it into pieces, and then to begin liberation of Crimea and then Donbass. So on 9th of February was 7,000 volunteers. Now I can tell you the fresh figure, 27,000 volunteers. So we don't have people just hiding. People want to fight, want to liberate our territory and to win this war. So please keep calm and arm Ukraine. That would be best solution to this war. Thank you for your attention. I would stop on this to allow my colleagues to make their presentation, and of course I will be happy to answer your questions. Thank you very much.
So, thank you very much. Thank you very much. And now I give the floor to the Ambassador of the United States, Ambassador Rahm.
Thank you. I want to thank my colleague and friend for his presentation over the chronology of the last year. A year ago, as this war started, I'm going to try to shrink my time into just a couple points, and that is to blow through some mythologies. One of those mythologies, especially on the heels of the United Nations vote that just occurred. A lot of that argument, and sometimes repeated in the press, is that somehow this is just a European conflict and that the global South has no place in there. 141 nations a year ago and 141 nations just the other day, or just a few hours ago, voted to condemn not only this war, but the integrity of Ukraine, their boundaries, geography, consistent with the United Nations Charter. Now, I did a little math this morning. You can go check it. But 83% of Latin America voted with Ukraine, with the principle of freedom, but also with the principle that boundaries matter. In the African Union, 75% voted with that principle. In the ASEAN countries, 80% voted for that principle. Now, all of us, the United States, Japan, others have nations that make up the EU have a lot of work to continue to do. But this notion that somehow this is just a European conflict, that those in the global south have no care for this and want this taken away from them, does not hold to the numbers. Numbers don't lie. Those aren't just kind of on the margin at 52, 53%. 83% of Latin America nations voted to uphold a principle consistently. 80% of the ASEAN countries. 75% of the African Union. And I do want to refer to a year ago, because I think the most eloquent speech, as I said here a year ago, and I want to repeat, was given by the Kenyan ambassador. And I want to just quote from him, as he told the UN Security Council, and this is the Kenyan ambassador, agreed we would settle for that we, meaning the African countries, would settle for the borders that we inherited. But we would still pursue continental political, economic, and legal integration, rather than form nations that looked ever backward into history with a dangerous nostalgia. We chose to look forward to a greatness none of our many nations and peoples had ever known. We chose to follow the rules. That is the voice of, quote unquote, the global south, whose hearts and minds and interests should be heard and listened to. Those are the numbers that make up 141 nations. This is not just the developed world. This is not just the United States and the EU isolated. Yes, 7 nations stood with Russia. About 30 plus stood on the sideline. But 141 stood together from all parts of the globe based on a principle. The second mythology I like to blow away, which is something reiterated constantly by President Putin, that this was started by NATO and NATO's expansion east. He said it just the other day, and he continues to repeat it. I would tell you, NATO did not, I was there in the White House as senior advisor to President Clinton in 1997. NATO did not expand east. Poland, Hungary, and the Czech Republic expanded west. That is what happened. They did, and in 2004, Lithuania, Estonia, Latvia expanded west. Nobody took a point of gun to these nations. They knew it was a point of no return. They had a choice. We're joined by the ambassador of Lithuania. We're also joined by the ambassador of Sweden. Do you think Sweden and Finland, at a point of a gun by the NATO nations, are joining? No, they're joining out of their own free will. They saw the future, and they know where their future lies, as part of a group of nations that uphold a certain set of values, a certain set of principles. And I would say to you that the West, defined as in generic terms, has a pull. That pull is about freedom. That pull is about liberty. That pull is about respect for the individual. It is the same pull that has had a million Russians leave Russia. It is the pull of freedom. It is a pull out of respect for the individual. That same pull is about entrepreneurs fleeing Hong Kong and fleeing China. It's the same pull of freedom that has the youth of Tehran standing up. So this notion that somehow NATO started this, NATO did not expand east. The people of these countries freely chose. And also, having been there, Russia used to participate in a partnership with NATO. This was a choice by President Putin. And I do not buy not only his argument, there are people in America who repeat his argument that somehow NATO's expansion or NATO's enlargement, that is what it was called, was the precipice of this war. And I would argue since March 12th, this coming March 12th, will be the 24-year anniversary of when Poland, Hungary, and the Czech Republic made a choice. In 2004, they were followed by Lithuania, Latvia, Estonia. In 2023, we will see Finland and Sweden. Not because NATO went east. They saw a future, a set of values, a set of ideas, and they chose to go west. And those values, as I just said when we were sitting in the other room, freedom is not free. Every generation is called upon to pay the price to defend a principle. That is this generation. In addition, this mythology that somehow Ukraine doesn't exist. That was another thing that was constantly repeated. Well, you better tell the 95% of the people that in that poll that say that they want to continue to fight, they don't exist. You better tell the people that attended and support a government and are willing to see loved ones leave to go fight and still join that battle, they don't exist. Not only as a nation do they exist, not only as a language do they exist, not only as a legal system do they exist, there is a history of fighting for that existence. He will know the history, my good friend, better than I, but in 2004 and 2014, when there were 15 rather, when there were attempts to cast away Ukraine, put it back under the Russian orbit, the people of Ukraine stood up. Tell them they don't exist. Tell them their individual language is not a language. Tell them their faith is not a distinct faith. And that somehow, again, that this war was fought in the name of denazification, which I said a year ago in the notion with a president who's of Jewish faith, that this was an attempt at denazification, is another mythology that the notion that you can continue to repeat a lie has its own truth. The notion in this last year we have seen a lie repeated with such impunity in the sense of, okay, that it's the right thing to do, that if you repeat it enough and with enough frequency, it becomes a belief. I would just say to you that for those who say that this is about denazification, they repeat a lie with such impunity, they would make even Goebbels blush. So I would just say to go back through all three of these mythologies to get to the truth is our responsibility. It's your responsibility. It's also our responsibility. And they cannot exist unquestioned. Thank you.
Okay. Thank you very much. And now I give the floor to you, Ambassador Chargé d'Affaires. Siemers.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much. Good afternoon, or good morning, rather. Of course, here I sit here as the Chargé of the European Union delegation, but I represent the European Union and all its 27 member states, all of whom are represented here in Tokyo, and some of which are here in the audience, not least, of course, the presidency, representative of the presidency of the European Union. All of us will have our own messages and actions during the day, some of them coordinated, some of them individually. But one of these messages, or the one underlying message we have in common, is we stand with Ukraine. It's sad that today we have to have this press conference 1 year on after this illegal, unprovoked, cruel and criminal aggression by Russia against Ukraine. An aggression that's fully illegal by international law, undermining the very principles of the UN Charter, launched by a member of the Security Council to boot. But we also see that everything about Russia's actions starting 24 February 2022 and continuing until today has been one giant miscalculation. Some of it already mentioned by the two preceding speakers, but also both in terms of its failure, which is apparent, and in terms of the response from the Ukrainian population, the 95% that you just mentioned, and from the world community, including the European Union, the US, the G7, and including Japan. One thing that I came across now in preparing for today was an op-ed that was written by our High Representative, Mr. Borrell, in which he described his visit to Ukraine a year ago, when he was asked by the Ukrainian defense minister, "Are you going to supply us with arms?" And at that moment, he said, "I was not so sure." And look where we are 1 year on. So this is where we stand. And I think, again, if we talk about the UN resolution, it's been mentioned, I don't need to come back to it in detail. This shows that in March 2022, in October 2022, and now we have exactly the same reaction to Russia's actions. When preparing for today, there were two words that came to my mind in particular: strength and solidarity. Strength of Ukraine and Ukrainian people, fighting day in and day out in the face of senseless brutality. Strength of the international community who supports Ukraine and also deals with the costs and the fallout of Russia's actions. Strength of the system of rule of law, and a demonstration, for example, through 6 and now 7 UN General Assembly resolutions condemning the aggression, making it clear that no, this world is not a free-for-all, this is not about the survival of the fittest. Our international system of rules and laws is first and foremost about every country's right to defend its sovereignty and determine its own fate, building itself in peace and prosperity. And I very much liked your expression of pull. It is the choice to follow the rule of law. And systems like the UN and the European Union itself have a pull for a reason, and that is the rule of law. Solidarity. The solidarity of the international community with Ukraine and its people. The solidarity within Europe, not only in supporting Ukraine, but also taking in and providing support to those who had to flee from the war. I think 8 million is the count that I have now, but it's changing every day, of course. Solidarity and unity amongst EU member states and determining jointly how to aid Ukraine, how to sanction Russia, 9 sanction packages already and the 10th one on its way. Providing financial support well in excess of 50 billion euros, European Union and member states combined in military, humanitarian and economic aid. Responding positively to Ukraine's bid for membership in the European Union. And solidarity, of course, by Japan with Ukraine, with Ukrainian refugees, with the international community, including the European Union. All of that comes back to the fact that we need to come to terms with a world where nothing is business as usual. And that some of the choices we made in the past are choices where probably the gains were not worth the costs that they entailed. And we're still in the process of finding a new way of de-risking these kinds of steps and these kinds of procedures, things that we decided. This is why the European Union has acted with the solidarity I mentioned earlier, through support for Ukraine, through successive sanctions packages aimed at undercutting Russia's war machine and economy that supports it, and through actions to help the rest of the world deal with the fallout. And whatever Mr. Putin's propaganda and disinformation machine cranks out, the sanctions are biting and are working with increasing impact over time. 1 year on in Tokyo, I just want to mention this also, starting with the immediate reaction of the shock, of course, on the 24th February 2022, but mostly messages of solidarity and support for our Ukrainian friends, including all of our 27 ambassadors and our EU delegation visiting the Ukraine embassy on that day. We will revisit that moment today in our social media feed. Japan's very strong show of solidarity from day one, including Foreign Minister Hayashi bringing refugees home on his return from the region. The welcome of the refugees here in Japan that we've seen as well, not just at the border, but in homes, in villages, in regions. A year of very, very regular contact between all of our leaders to coordinate support, sanctions, and other actions. You've seen all the images of meetings, NATO, EU combined, G7, and so forth and so on. I think what has come to our minds now, of course, as well, is that the aggression against Ukraine has reinforced the realization that what happens in Ukraine and Europe now could happen elsewhere. And the statements by Prime Minister Kishida, I would want to remember as well, saying that strategic space on the Atlantic side, the Pacific side, is really actually folded into one, accelerating the determination for all of us to cooperate more closely on security, whether it's between the EU, its member states, and Japan, or in the context of the Indo-Pacific. Europe is very present in the region, including in the context of our Indo-Pacific strategy, and we are working very hard to further strengthen that security relationship. And then let me close with by coming back to the starting point of what I said today. This day, 24 February, will forever be recalled as the day where Russia started its brutal, unprovoked, and illegal invasion of Ukraine. This is not just a European issue. It is not just about the West. It is about what world it is that we all want to live in. In the European Union, we have built a peace project for the past almost 75 years. Like what we are trying to do in a broader context as well, this is founded on self-determination of sovereign states and the rule of international law on a rules-based order. This is what Ukrainians are fighting for today. This is why we are supporting them and will continue to support them, because this is the world we want to live in.
Thank you very much. Before I open the floor, I would like to questions. I would like to ask you a follow-up question. In your speech, you mentioned the Japanese support. Can you please elaborate a little bit on the Japanese support to explain what they did, and also what role Japan can play in diplomacy to help Ukraine?
There is there is a long list of measures what have been done by government of Japan to support Ukraine. If we try to put it in figures, it's 1.6 billion of assistance of different kind. There are, if I'm not mistaken, 17 waves of sanctions, a lot of efforts to frozen accounts, to put a ban on export and import of sensitive materials, etc., etc. More than 2,300 Ukrainians were admitted to the country, unprecedented number. For the first time since the Second World War, government provided non-lethal but still support to our army in protective gears and to some equipment for our rescue service, demining, so things which are very important for us. I cannot find proper words how to thank the people of Japan, because what is most important for us, that people of Japan, more than 80%, fully support the governmental policy towards Ukraine. 97% now see Russia without blindfolded by propaganda. So as an enemy, as a country which is not friendly, and that you have always have seen in December, landslide decision to change the strategic documents for Japan's security, which are very important for the region and for all of for everyone, as it was very rightfully said, because the world is now much more interconnected than ever before. So that is in municipalities, on every level. I travel a lot through the country. I've been yesterday in a small city in Saitama province. You should see that when there are not a single Ukrainian refugee there, but you have this support, this passion coming from their hearts. They support us with, first of all, with money, but as well, as I told them, it's very important is government will listen to you and would understand that this is not just desire of LDP or even maybe by partisan support in the parliament. This is a desire of people of Japan to support Ukraine, and we are very, very grateful for that, eternally grateful. So that's what I can say.
I know the question wasn't addressed to me, but I would just, as recently as the other day, the Prime Minister and the government made a pledge, $5.5 billion towards the redevelopment, and it's a significant step. And just to add that to the...
Yeah, exactly. Sorry, I forgot. You mentioned what else could be done. This is where we see the leadership of Japan. That's reconstruction of Ukraine. I cannot recall other country in the world which has this persistent experience coming from disastrous earthquakes, beginning from 1923, Tokyo and Yokohama, and until the Tohoku in 2011, and Second World War. Absolutely stunning experience, and that was Japan, who came out of ashes of the Second World War, and then helping other countries like Korea and China, if you want, and Vietnam and other countries in the region to help to rebuild after disastrous internal conflicts. All their conflicts are different compared to Ukraine because we don't have a civil war inside the country. But nevertheless, experience of Japan, the ability to concentrate financial and technological resources on reconstruction, absolutely immense here. We want to see Shinkansen. We want to see bridges like in Japan. We want to see highways. We want to see technology companies coming to Ukraine. We do have very skilled labor force. That will be like desirable and very much important outcome of this conflict if we talk about Japan participation.
Please introduce yourself by name and affiliation, and please limit you to one question.
I actually have two quick questions. So I'm Toshio Ogata with Arc Times. I have one question to Mr. Korsunsky and one quick question to Mr. Emanuel. So Mr. Korsunsky, so with President Biden's trip to Ukraine a few days ago, Prime Minister Kishida is the only G7 Prime Minister who has not visited Ukraine yet. He has been preparing for that, but has not happened yet. What's your sense on his potential visit to Ukraine?
He is very much welcomed, and it's up to him and to government of Japan to decide when he goes. We have no, I have no portfolio and no desire to push this solution, but of course, from our point of view, it's extremely important in the country which is now chairs G7, and the leader of this country would visit Ukraine and see with his own eyes. I can tell you about myself. Being Ukrainian and being 24 hours a day during this year on those issues, when I visited Kyiv and Mykolaiv in December, it's a completely different story. You must feel that. So I believe it's extremely important for him to go, and definitely when it comes to security, I cannot help myself but to point to recent President Biden's visit, which definitely was not less security involved. So, and it was done, and Prime Minister of Italy and Spain and so many leaders were visited Ukraine before. So I'm pretty much sure we are able to organize it in a very safe manner, and definitely I very much hope that visit will take place. Japan is a friend, is extremely important country. It is truly important if Prime Minister of this country would visit Ukraine.
Mr. Emanuel, you just mentioned that the Ukraine situation is not a European conflict, and Japan responded. And TBS reporter Hoshi Hiroshi told us that you are in a regular communication with Kihara, a deputy cabinet secretary, and you are actually meeting him weekly basis, and you press Japan to spend more on the defense side. Did you specifically ask press Japan to double its budget by 2027 or boost its budget to a level of 2% of GDP? Or if not, can you give us a sense what kind of message you send to Japanese side?
Well, first of all, I don't usually describe, discuss, or shed light on a private conversation. But that said, the only people that believe that I'm that influential is my mother. Okay, but I'll make sure she calls you, and you can deal with the Jewish mother at that point and see how that works out for you. So on a serious note, though, but let me say it this way. And this, I don't think the Prime Minister gets enough credit. Before a Russian tank was on the Ukrainian border for the special military operation. October 2021. The Prime Minister ordered the 3 strategic documents to be totally rewritten. To the Prime Minister's great credit, he looked around the corner. He saw what others had not seen. Even on February 23rd, others of 2022 did not see. In October, he saw it. He said, I need the 3 strategic documents to be rewritten because the world, as I always like to say, there were 3 C's that changed the world. COVID, coercion, and conflict. And everybody's rereading, rethinking how to react to that. And it was the Prime Minister's foresight and prescient that the world had changed and asked for a rewrite of the document. Second, the defense budget is an outgrowth and a reflection of those documents, freely written by the Japanese government and then adopted in a debate which will happen in a parliamentary system, and it was adopted by the cabinet, and the parliament and the Diet here will vote on it. It was not Rahm Emanuel, and again I want to repeat, literally the only person that believes that is my mother, but the Japan elected officials and the public have been debating topics as it relates to not only the size of the defense budget, but what it will be composed. And so you can draw that however you want, and it's being done in a fully transparent way in front of the public.
Well, you haven't answered my question. As the U.S.
Oh, no, I've
ambassador,
answered your question.
well, what kind of message did you send Japanese side as a U.S. ambassador regarding defense
I mean,
budget?
the same statement, there's nothing I say private that's not what I say publicly. Then I've been I don't think nobody would ever describe me as shy. I think I'm self-aware, at least to that level. I am not shy. I've been forthright as the ambassador of the United States about the importance for deterrence. Japan has a long, as just noted on the development side, and their expertise, not only their resources that will be important for Ukraine's future on the development side. They have a long, rich history on the diplomatic side. And they are developing along both the development and diplomatic side a credible level of deterrence, because the world today is a different world. Do you want my mother's phone number?
As Ambassador Emanuel,
Can you introduce yourself?
yeah,
please?
sorry, Takeshi Kawasaki, freelancing. As Ambassador Emanuel said that the United Nations adopted Security Council resolution demanding Russian withdrawal from Ukraine, with 141 in favor, 7 against, and 32 abstentions. Ambassador Korsunsky, what do you examine the reason of these countries that abstained?
Abstain?
Abstain.
Ah, okay.
32 countries. And they not sympathized to Ukraine people. What can you improve this situation? If Mr. Ambassador Emanuel and Ambassador Siemers has any comment, please.
I was going to go. Hold on.
Thank you. First of all, just correction, it's not resolution not of the Security Council. It's a General Assembly. In Security Council, you can do nothing because you have China and Russia with veto power. They will never allow anything to do, even when it comes to North Korea, which is absolutely transparent and clear, they still vote against. United Nations business is a very tricky one. When you consider and you push through resolution, you have enormous amount of consultations in capital, in New York, and between ambassadors, and each country take into account many reasons how to vote, and definitely the majority of them consider it as exactly as Ambassador Emanuel mentioned, as a matter of principle. So they take the issue and they apply to themselves. Do they want to be under what circumstances? If other countries will invade them, how they want to see system working. I mean, because only major power can afford try to major power. I mean, with autocratic regimes, they don't care about publicity. Democratic countries, they work through institutions. They don't work through personal influence. So in all those discussions, you see different reasons how to vote. The point is, this is not the first resolution which such results. We have had even 143 votes for us. There are small changes coming in Africa, and definitely that's because African nations, they are affected by much simpler reasons rather than military force. They took a look at what is going on the markets for food, and that disruption of food supply from Ukraine is a very substantial problem, because Ukraine among 5 biggest suppliers of the food to the world. And when you know this initiative, which was very difficult to push through with UN and Turkey assistance to open grain from Ukraine, and where Japan, by the way, participated in a very active manner. So here you see different reasons behind. But I would say it's already important that China and Iran, which are mostly you consider on the side with Russia, they abstain from votes. With a number of 7, and you would see those 7. This is completely ridiculous to see this is environment of Russia. So that's what Russia diplomacy achieved in 30 years. Those 7 countries, it is truly a disaster. I would consider like this.
I want to. I know the question wasn't directed at me. I brought this as this is the vote on the board at the United Nations. Green reflects those that voted against Russia and for the integrity of the principles of the United Nations and for Ukraine. Yellow votes as the abstention that you noted, and red are the votes that stood side by side with Russia. I gave you the percentages earlier to break down and deal with this mythology, in my view, of a global South that's alienated from these values and principles of freedom, rule of law, and respect for individual. Now, I would say to you 2 things. One is nobody who's in the green should ever treat a country like a Kenya or any member of the African Union or ASEAN countries who casted this vote as a victory. It's a victory, but you have to work every day to both be persuasive, invest in the future. And I can say honestly, in the United States, we haven't done and upheld that all the time to the perfect. We need to do a better job of that. And to those that abstained, without getting through each individual country's calculation and decision, we have to do a better job of making sure that they see a future that has a gravitational pull towards the freedom and aren't coerced into standing on the sideline and letting others carry the fight forward as it relates to respect for both sovereignty, the rule of law, and the integrity of a country's boundaries. So this is a day in and day out effort. But this notion that somehow the global South is basically, this is a European conflict just on the continent and Europe has nothing to do with them, that can't reflect in 2 votes over a year, 141 from all parts of the world, where here in this part of the world, 8 out of 10 ASEAN countries took a stand, who have long history with Russia. 75% in the African Union. Long history where the Wagner Group is clearly operating. So, and then 83% in Latin America. That is not geographically limited. It's across the globe, speaking with one voice with the clarity of what it means.
I would maybe add very quickly as well, it's basically same kind of thing, which is that what you have to look at is the figures. After 1 year, we have exactly the same figures that we had 1 year ago. Yeah. And this despite 1 year of enormous efforts of peddling some kind of a parallel universe narrative to all of the global South countries that we're working with. But there's also been 1 year of consistent effort by all of us, and European Union certainly in particular, to beef up our efforts, not only in terms of, let's say, the verbal support for the global South and for the system of rule of law, but also the material support to help countries deal with the fallout, including things like solidarity lanes for food exports and so forth and so on. So this is the story. And continuing to work, as Rahm said as well, is the thing that we're obviously going to do, continue to talk to those who are still in the abstention lane and who are convinced to work with us much more closely.
Khaldun.
Thank you. Khaldun Azhari, Pan-Arab News and Arab News Japan. I lost that question, so I will improvise it. Sorry.
We'll do the same on our answers.
We saw the pictures of destruction in the infrastructure in Ukraine, and especially I watch also sometimes on TV the beautiful buildings being destroyed. That's really a loss for the heritage, world heritage sometimes. So what is the scale of this destruction is now, and with the war seems to be going with no end in sight, how this infrastructure would help you to continue the fighting. And if I may, Mr. Rahm, ask you, in regard of the nuclear threats, what would America do to alleviate the concern of the world about this, not only in between Russia and Ukraine, but all over the world? If there was a nuclear war, we all might, vanish. So how is America taking care of this issue? Thank you very much.
Ukrainians, they have a character when they, to criticize their own government, their own infrastructure. They're always unhappy with what they have. That was before the war. Right now, even for us, it's a huge surprise that we found that our infrastructure is much more resilient than we expected. For example, our railway system, it's amazingly operational and it works. And we are opening new destinations, and this is something which you could not expect in a country with 5,000 missiles coming. It is very difficult to estimate number of homes destroyed. The figure, I know 150,000, and hundreds of hospitals, thousands were partially destroyed, hundreds of them were destroyed completely. Dozens and dozens of universities. The problem is not in figure. The problem is that we began to restore it. And we are surviving this winter with immense help from the world. Generators, these war generators probably reverberated in every capital around the globe, and specifically in the EU, US, and Japan sent hundreds of them, big and small, for different purposes. And when you go now in Kyiv, and you will see that offices are open, restaurants are open, small bakeries bake food, and all of them have generator outside. It's very noisy, polluting the air, but this is a small problem compared to stay without electricity. We were able to repair our major electricity grid destructions. We were able to maintain, again, I know that other countries supply a lot of equipment, but I can say for Japan, city of Yokohama sent to Odessa 33 portable devices to clean water. 2 big, almost industrial site water cleaning equipment was sent to Mykolaiv, where huge problem with water. So, and that is something, and this assistance coming from the whole world. Another thing that we help already a project with particular countries. For example, very recently I learned that Lithuania helped to rebuild the school. And that is something small, that's countries which are around us, they are helping us with small projects right now, which are needed for people to return, because Ukrainians are returning home. It's amazingly, but still fight is going on, but they're coming back from Europe specifically. Even a couple of dozens of Ukrainians came back from Japan. That is their desire, and of course we just need an infrastructure. Very recently I learned about the project, which is very quietly, without any advertisement. Polish professionals, they helped us in 3 months to completely demine Kyiv region, Kyiv Oblast, which is the most populated. So that is another example. So those projects for reconstruction, they already began. The point is that we need, of course, big scale. We want to rebuild Ukraine, to modernize it, because we are on the eve to membership in the EU, so we must do that. That is something which is on the agenda, and it is not a number of what have been destroyed, the number of what have been rebuilt. For us, it's more important now.
3 quick points I'll do. One is it shouldn't go without at least recognition, notice. Japanese companies have been some of the biggest suppliers of the generators that are essential. Mitsubishi Heavy Industries, Kawasaki, other companies. And the United States has been actively working with them. And I can say this personally also, since Amy and I have been personally donated for 3 generators into Ukraine. Second, America's been at the forefront in the battle on nuclear nonproliferation and the consequences of the spread of nuclear weapons, whether that's here by North Korea, dealing with China, trying to get it into some international system, and as well as Iran, just to name 3 areas where the United States has been at the forefront of trying to prevent nuclear proliferation. It's been a core plank of America's national security and foreign policy for decades. I think those, I'll just, in the interest of time, and I know you have a lot of questions, I'll leave my third one aside, I'll come back to it and figure out another place.
So just very, very quickly on the infrastructure side as well, and the support side, is an enormous amount of stuff indeed, as you said, going on behind the scenes. So one of the things we've seen all the efforts that are being made by Japan. Just one small remark today, for example, we're going to collect and then hand over a donation we received from a local community here in Japan, but also from the European Union side, 37.8 billion in terms of economic aid. 5,400 generators, small thing, 35 million light bulbs, support for rebuilding the grid, and also, more importantly, in the context of Ukraine's bid for membership, already efforts to link up with EU programs to support Ukraine as well.
Well, I know you want to go, but I want to make this point. Really what has scared Putin is Ukraine's success. Ukraine economically successful, Ukraine politically successful. What he cannot handle, both as a philosophy, ideology, and politically, most importantly to him, is if Ukraine was to economically survive, not only survive, but thrive. If Ukraine has a functioning, operable democracy, that is a mirror up to the failures within the Russian system. That is what's at stake here. So you can listen to whatever you want. It's about NATO. It's about denazification. You can believe all that.
It's about success. Yeah.
This is a point that Ukraine would be a politically and economically viable state that would hold up a mirror to all the weaknesses, vulnerabilities of the Russian system. And the reason for this war is because of Ukraine's success and Russia's failures.
Thank you very much. I'm Hiroki Shoda from TV Asahi. So everybody is wondering if Kishida's visit Ukraine, but there are many problems, security. So, Mr. Ambassador Emanuel, does the United States ready, prepared to support the Kishida's visit as an ally? I think there are many kinds of support, including escort and sharing secret information. So, and the second question, Mr. Korsunsky, G7 Hiroshima summit will be held in Hiroshima. So, will President Zelensky visit to Japan? Because I think Japan will be the first foreign country except United States and some European country. So please tell us the negotiation between Japanese government and Ukraine, actually, please.
You want to go first? No. Oh, you don't want to go first? Okay. Let me say this, and since it was written about it, therefore I can comment. It's, look, the planning for the president's trip was months in the making. One doesn't just kind of go buy a ticket on a train. It's not as easy as like a train here. And I could say that with some familiarity on a Pasmo. So I would just say to you, and that's going to be true for any leader, there are months and months of preparation, and I'm sure the Prime Minister will go at the appropriate time. But you cannot just think of it as just kind of I'm coming on a Tuesday, I'm booking my flight. So there's preparations. It is a war zone, and I can tell you for the President of the United States, the Speaker of the House, or any Senate leadership from an American perspective, this is not done with just a flip of the switch. There's a lot of work that goes into that, and that's appropriate for any leader, and I think that Ukraine knows that and acknowledges that and will work with any government.
As to G7 summit in Hiroshima, look, we have, beyond the general world-level problem of nuclear proliferation, and nuclear weapons coming to Iran, North Korea, China said triple its potential. All this very disturbing. What connected Ukraine and Japan is Fukushima, Chernobyl. This is one thing. Occupation of Russian Federation of Zaporizhzhia nuclear power plant, and very open act of terrorism, of nuclear terrorism. They threaten to blow it up if we try to liberate the territory. Of course we will liberate it. This 100%. The question is how? We cannot afford this game. This is not a game. We survived through Chernobyl, and as somebody who was in Kyiv at those days, I can tell you this is not the experience you want to repeat. So this is danger for the whole region. And they try to do in Chernobyl, but they left because they found somehow that Chernobyl is still a very dangerous zone. So they were irradiated, those Russians in the zone. Another, that is constant threat to use nuclear weapons against Ukraine. That is very often in the media speculation that what would happen if Putin is cornered and he will use tactical nuclear weapons. First, it's not that easy. Second, it has no sense. Third, as I show you, we are not afraid. We are preparing for that. It could happen because you deal with psychopath, which has no limit in killing people. But definitely there is an understanding in the world community and very close watch on what is going on in this area, because you can't open this Pandora box. It's already opened in a very bad way. In a way when you became thinking in the military terms, if you want to resolve problems between states, nuclear weapons, this is deterrence weapons. It is not weapon of a war, it should not be ever. So that is why I believe that together we will be able to stop. That is why I believe that personal participation of President Zelensky in the summit in Hiroshima, it will be very important. Of course, in a part devoted to Ukraine, we understand that G7 countries, they have a bigger agenda to talk about, but definitely that will be very symbolic, very important, exactly because we already knows what does it mean to live in a country when you have on your territory you have nuclear disaster. Therefore, it is not bilateral issue. This is an issue which should be coordinated among G7. There is a mechanism, and with the EU, because EU always participate now. So I believe that this idea is worth discussing and worth very carefully considering. I mean, again, taking into account security issues, because it was able to fly to United States because you fly over democratic territory, normal territory. But when you fly to Japan, you have very careful how you navigate, how you manage. So, but this is a technical issue. If there is an invitation, definitely it will be very thoroughly discussed with Japanese authorities and with other partners how to do that.
One question. Can you go a little bit over time? We have 3 questions left.
3 questions? Yeah. I have 4 answers. 3 questions, we'll see.
Okay, then first you, and then Ilvin, and then the last question is from our online audience.
Thank you. I'm Yoshimoto, a reporter from NHK, and I'd like to ask one question for Ambassador Korsunsky. As always, the other reporter asked about regarding the Hiroshima summit, which will be held in May. Just make it clear, are there any possibilities that President Zelensky will visit Hiroshima? Do you really considering the possibilities in your within your government? And if it is, have significant which President Zelensky himself visit Japan?
You know, I don't want to consider this issue in terms of theory. Theoretically, we may consider to visit any place in the world. I think it's we should wait a little bit until the G7 will set up an agenda. As far as I understand today, there will be online G7 summit with participation of President Zelensky. I understand that day before yesterday it was a foreign minister meeting of G7 with physical presence of our Minister of Foreign Affairs Kuleba in Berlin. So that is already a very positive development. I know that our ministers from our government already invited by their Japanese counterparts to participate in meetings of ministers because there will be a lot of ministerial meetings of G7. They already began to invite Ukrainians to participate. This is very important. We have to be in a constant dialogue with the most developed countries to fully understand what we should do, how we should do that, to be then to quickly be admitted to EU and to have security guarantees after our victory. Because we didn't talk about that, but after victory we have to survive in a safe environment. So that is the point. So therefore, let us wait very patiently until the decision will be taken, and then the issues will be considered. As exactly Ambassador Emanuel said, that is a matter of months. It will not be public, of course, because those preparations include a huge security issues for everyone. I mean, for all presidents, and for Ukrainian president definitely, because as you know, Russians in a year ago, Russians said minimum, we know for sure, 3 death squads to Kiev to kill him, because all 3 were destroyed. We know about them. So we should be very careful. Online participation was already happening last year. So we believe it would be extremely important if he participates personally, but everything will depend on the situation on the ground in our war and upon the invitation and all the security arrangements we can provide.
Thank you very much.
Ilgin Yorulmaz from BBC World Turkish. Thank you for coming here today. Mr. Ambassador Korsunsky, you mentioned scores of Russians lose their lives on the front, the tanks, sophisticated weapons like thermobaric, multiple rocket launchers being destroyed, the Russians. And of course, the visits by President Biden and latest Prime Minister Sanchez of Spain, all of these must be putting pressure on President Putin and making him behave irrationally, as you have mentioned. The Russians getting desperate, the Russian government. Can I just ask you, are you assuming that perhaps President Putin may be looking for a way out of this without losing face? And can the world help this? Because keeping calm and arming Ukraine is really, understandably, your call for the world. But the world is also on the edge when there is a nuclear threat, and there's no end to this conflict. And of course, if you want to also comment, Ambassador Rahm, if this is a proxy war or not. Thank you.
To save, you ask whether President Putin is looking to save his face. Before you save your face, you must have it. Look, they escalate all the time. The democratic coalition reciprocate. And we are willing to take this fight because we have no choice. If we stop fighting, there is no Ukraine and there is no Ukrainians. This is very simple. So therefore, we believe that this understanding is already very deep. It's very deep, as our colleague from Europe mentioned. That is unimaginable a year ago that European Union will be heavily involved in supplying weapons. But that is what's happening because everyone see in very clear picture, intelligence works. What is going on? You cannot explain this in rational terms. Everything is irrational. And Putin is trying to show that victory is imminent, but at the same time he wants to negotiate. Each time now he is saying that we will now modernize our nuclear weapons, etc. What he is trying to do, he is trying to get United States at the table to negotiate over Ukraine because he believes, exactly your second question, this is proxy war. So he believes in what he needs to be recognized, as Dugin said, as a great country, if Russia must win under any circumstances, or world should not exist. In this philosophy, what we see as reasonable to try to stop as early as possible, but we cannot stop it voluntarily. We must reciprocate on each of its escalation. His last speech, that was universal vision of his last speech. This is not even late Brezhnev. This is 1975 Communist Party of the Soviet Union. So I remember it. He already exhausted in exhausting his fantasy. Now he says that Ukraine became anti-Russian. That was job of Austro-Hungarian Empire and Poland in 19th century. So you should see this picture. He's crazy. Sorry, he's crazy. What he's saying, it's insane. So how you can evaluate this development in rational terms? What we're trying to do, we try to be ready. We try to be ready for every development, and we try to use properly the excellent equipment. You mentioned this thermobaric. They have a lot of pieces of quite good military, but we have HIMARS, and they are completely different level. So with HIMARS, you can destroy so precise, so effectively that whatever they use, so we're not afraid. We try, but at the point they agree to leave territory of Ukraine, that will be next level of discussions. But first and foremost, get out of our territory, full territory, including Crimea.
The short answer to you is no.
That's it.
The long answer is, or a longer answer than no. It's not a proxy. Go back, and this is the one thing we didn't do, and we owe you that. You look at all the proposals that were made to President Putin prior to the war to avoid a war. Look at them today, and then look at what's happened, and contrast what was offered versus what he has brought to the world. This was a decision by one man made alone, not on a special military operation. You don't call up 300,000 additional soldiers. It's a war. It's a war that he made, and he could have avoided it. Our job was to stand by a friend who actually national sovereignty and integrity of their boundaries have been violated in direct violation of the UN Charter. And that's a principle worth fighting for and supporting. Rather, not fighting for, but support. And that is exactly what we've done. Ukraine is fighting for it.
Okay, last question, quick and dirty, by our former President Anthony Rowley. He asked, the Russia-Ukraine conflict is intensifying and drawing in ever more nations, thus threatening a global confrontation. Can each of the ambassadors here today say with hand on their heart that they are doing their utmost to help reach a negotiated settlement between the warring parties before it's too late?
President Zelensky, when he was elected with a message, I would like to sit with Putin to resolve our issues. That was his words. We put it on the list what Russia is unhappy. We will put what we want, and we will cross each issue after we discuss it. He was heavily criticized inside Ukraine for this position. And that is something unimaginable, that we were heading at the war with Russia. So, but what is happening right now, as I told you, after our soldiers have seen children raped in Bucha, people killed with their hands tied in the back, when they saw all the atrocities they committed, what kind of discussions could be about peace? Of course we want to achieve peace, but we see it now only through military success on the ground. As well, I would like to comment, this is not a conflict between Russia and Ukraine. This is war of Russia against Ukraine. Very simple. I'm not happy when it's called war in Ukraine, because you may think it's a civil war in Ukraine. There is no civil war whatsoever. this is brutal aggression from outside. So we are ready to bring peace as soon as possible. But as I said, for any other step forward, first must be done, that's withdrawal all the troops from the Ukrainian territory. That's number one. Then, if it happens, we will discuss how we can achieve other steps that Russia pay, reparations, and we prosecute war criminals. That is very simple formula. And President Zelensky put even longer list, 10 points, which are more global, because exactly as is in question, we don't want more countries to be involved. We want more countries to in a war. We want more countries to be involved in a peace. And how to achieve this peace? We have 10-point formula, which was supported by the United States. It was supported by European Union. It was supported by the General Assembly of the United Nations.
The hand on the heart, do I have to do that part, or can I just answer it? Okay. Yes.
I want to elaborate a little bit more, but the answer is the points are on the table, including President Zelensky's 10-point plan. There's been numerous attempts, as Rahm Emanuel said, to come to some form of agreement. All of this has not worked in one bit. So for the moment, the position that we have is A, we support the 10-point plan, and B, we will continue to support Ukraine until Russia leaves Ukraine's territory as within its international borders.
Okay, thank you very much.
Thank you.
And hereby I will end the event and thank our guests.
Thank you.
And I hope we won't have to meet again under these circumstances. Thank you very much.
Thank you.